Risk Universalis Guidebook, prepared under the direction of the Directorate, 29th of October, 2023. Since you're too lazy to just read, here's also the audio. You're welcome. Chapter 1. Our Community. Risk Universalis is a community that hosts multiple roleplay games that involve players using various tools to paint and create on either a world map or other spaces. Ranks. Our group has several ranks each with a purpose that serves to better the community. For a more detailed breakdown of staff roles, click here. Participant, the foundation of our community. Banished, players who are banned from Risk. Experienced, participant, participants who have earned the trust of the administration and have received limited extra privileges in-game. To become one, you should have no ban record in the last 2 months. Public assistant, public players who have earned the trust and respect of the staff and have limited moderation powers of constructive voiding, as defined under Section Voiding 3A. Trial moderator, the first level of staff with full moderation powers. Moderator, responsible for maintaining order in the game servers. Senior moderator, responsible for maintaining order in the game servers, as well as assisting in management of lower staff. Retired staff, former staff members who have contributed to the group. Respected peer, members who have greatly contributed to Risk's culture or administration. They share the same responsibilities as a moderator, but can void them as well. Administrator manages aspects of the community, as well as monitors lower staff members. Head administrator manages and monitors upper staff members. Director oversees and manages the community and all staff positions. Developer, members who develop the game. Chapter 2. Our staff. The Risk Universalis staff team seeks to serve and better its community. The staff from public assistant to director values respect, fairness, and justice. Any issue regarding the staff should be sent to a director. Our staff is divided into 2 categories, being lower and upper staff. Lower staff functions to serve the day-to-day needs of the community, while the upper staff handles the management and administration. It is the duty of the staff to educate and assist, not control the server. Staff are not untouchable and are held to high expectations. Expectations: display a positive and respectful attitude, perform with honesty and integrity, maintain good activity, and conduct themselves in a professional manner. Applications. Joining our staff team is a huge responsibility that requires patience, diligence, and commitment. If you have these qualities and want to serve the Risk community, fill out our trial moderator application. Chapter 3. Rules. The general rules and guidelines to be listed help us maintain order and improve our community. General rules. Rules for each of our games vary by game, but these are some general rules which apply to all of our games. Treat others with respect. Trolling or toxicity is prohibited. Griefing is prohibited. Making false claims, accusations, or reporting is prohibited. Spamming cities, forts, roads, or text boxes is prohibited. Lore walls on the map are prohibited. The History tab must be used. Neon colors are prohibited. Usage of text boxes dedicated solely to individual commanders is prohibited. Use them within an existing army. There is a text box limit of 2 for nation info. Use the country UI instead. Whoever uses the country UI to claim a nation, first rightfully owns the nation. Community rules. The following are not considered as enforced regulations, but rather as previously unwritten guidelines that the community has adopted over a period of time. Follow them at your own discretion. A new server requires the presence of at least 5 players before an era vote could be held. Any actions that are not role-played are considered to have happened historically. Chapter 4. Roleplay guidelines. Roleplay fail. Roleplay is an intentional lack of roleplay or roleplaying in an unrealistic way and is prohibited in all forms. Power play is where player A does not give player B the opportunity to roleplay his or her actions. God modding is using roleplay to make oneself invincible or overpowered and overstepping the limitations of realistic roleplay. Teleporting is when a user moves their units across vast distances that are unrealistic, or it is when a player moves their units without roleplay. Stalling is when a player purposefully dodges their obligation to roleplay for any reason. Metagaming is when the player roleplays an action according to information that their character couldn't be aware of. Nation ruining is when the player acts in a way to purposely destroy a country. Realism. Realism is an important aspect of roleplay. Realistic roleplay is that which pertains to history and is congruent with real-life international relations, economics, politics, demographics, climate, etc. All roleplay is expected to be realistic, but realism does not have to mimic history, alternate history. While Risk Universalis emphasizes history in its gameplay, this does not mean at all that roleplay has to accurately follow the historical timeline. Players are free to change the course of time in their roleplay. However, alternate history does not mean that players can neglect realism and purposely metagame to avoid events. Weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, are allowed for use in roleplay in realistic scenarios. Players, however, may not use WMDs in a manner that would end the world or the server. Voiding. Voiding is an action. Risk staff can take in response to roleplay actions reasonably regarded as implausible. This contains, but is not limited to, breaches of points 1 and 2 of the roleplay guidelines. Constructive voiding should be the first course of action by Risk staff. It is when an admin sees a player's roleplay isn't fully plausible and helps the player. Staff members could do the following: ask them what they're trying to achieve, what the plan is, and give suggestions for more plausible ways to achieve it. The player then has the choice to void their own actions and follow the new plan or come up with their own plan. Point out why the roleplay is implausible and suggest what would happen if their leader did try to do this. A coup, blocked by their advisors or the judiciary. Does the plan backfire? The player could then roleplay the consequences of their plans going wrong with the admin's oversight. The most important thing is, they must help the player come up with an alternative to the action the admin isn't permitting. Destructive voiding is only to be the last resort by Risk staff. It is when a situation is restored to the historical status quo. There are two types of destructive void. A hard void is the erasure of past events in the server history and the replacement of them with an assumption of the historical status quo. This is the most disruptive and should only be necessary for response to fail roleplay, where constructive voiding has failed. A soft void is the use of roleplay events to restore a part of the server to the historical status quo. This is still very disruptive to a player's game and should only be necessary in response to poor realism, where constructive voiding has failed. Self-voiding is the act of reversing one's own roleplay. Players are prohibited from reversing roleplay that ended up backfiring. Self-voiding has to be the result of a genuine mistake. Participants facing a void have a right to a constructive dialogue with the member of Risk staff in order to figure out a constructive void acceptable to both parties. If a member of Risk staff uses a destructive void without attempting a dialogue, that member should be reported to a higher-ranking member. Internal roleplay. Nations and their leaders are the main aspect of risk in managing your nation, and all the roleplay involved is vital to a great server. Internal sabotage is intentionally sabotaging your nation or host nation, through roleplay or other means. Nation owners have various rights as the owner, including removing generals or helpers at any time. Nation owners do not have to allow other nations or players paths, cities, forts, or text boxes in their nation. Exception with this is during an invasion or conflict. All countries must be painted in a color that is traditionally used to represent the country in question, or must use a color that can be otherwise justified for use. A change in color can only occur should there be a significant change made to the country in question, whether it be a form of government, politics, religion, or otherwise. For all historical era role plays, players of a country will be allowed to make alternate history lore up to 20 years before the start of the session. These lore changes may only be differences in internal events that do not affect neighboring countries, unless you were willing to coordinate lore changes with the affected players. Lore changes against NPCs are banned. Lore changes cannot be made once the session has started. In case of any disagreements, it is up to a trial moderator plus discretion whether the lore is deemed to be realistic or not, and to apply appropriate changes to it if necessary. You may use differences of color to denote subdivisions so long as their political status is clear. For example, pink Congress Poland, but recognizably a vassal under Russia. Painting your country using multiple colors, for example as a flag map, is prohibited. You may paint an emblem contained within your country's borders so long as there is at least a stud of continuous solid color, your nation color, on all your borders. Revolutions amp rebellions. A rebellion, uprising, or insurrection is the role-playing of typically organized opposition and resistance to challenge a government's authority or evade achieve concessions, a refusal of obedience and order. Players role-playing a rebellion do not need the permission of a staff member to rebel. However, a player must be able to prove they have reasonable justification to challenge or maintain the status quo. Rebellions are rarely sudden and take time to cultivate. A rebellion cannot pop into existence and requires significant role-play in the development of the rebellion. Not only this, but the player is also expected to hold a significant understanding of previous roleplay within the server. It is ultimately the decision of a staff member to dictate the validity of a rebellion. If the player orchestrating the rebellion is ultimately able to achieve victory or is defeated, then the individuals role-playing the affair must come to a decision on how to conclude the conflict. A revolution is the role-playing of a fundamental and relatively sudden change in political power and organization. Revolutions typically occur as a result of perceived oppression or incompetence within a government. Revolutions often result in significant changes to culture, economics, and social-political institutions. Likewise, of rebellions, players do not need permission to role-play a revolution. However, a player must be able to prove they have reasonable justification to challenge or maintain the status quo. A revolution cannot form out of nowhere and requires significant role-play of the development of the revolution. Not only this, but the player is also expected to hold a significant understanding of previous role-play within the server. It is ultimately the decision of a staff member to dictate the validity of a revolution. External role-play. Dice. When role-playing a battle, instead of determining the results of engagement through role-play, players may want to use an in-game tool known as dice. The dice tool randomly generates a number out of 20. When using dice to determine the results of a battle, players typically roll to see who has a higher number. Keep in mind, the usage of dice should not replace basic roleplay. Merely replacing all roleplay with dice commands is fail roleplay. A single dice roll cannot determine the fall of a major city, fortification, or the collapse of an entire front. Major cities and strategic fortifications require multiple engagements in order to capture and considerable roleplay unless the defendant surrenders. The usage and effects of the dice tool are entirely up to the players involved in a military roleplay and is subject to interpretation depending on the situation. In order to use pure roleplay, all players roleplaying a battle must agree, otherwise the battle will be determined by the dice tool. The dice tool is turn-based, however, certain exemptions are up to staff discretion. Dice bonuses. Before dice is used to determine the results of a battle, both combatants must agree on the odds of victory. These odds are influenced by bonuses to the dice roll, which are values added to the result of the initial roll, depending on variables that yield an advantage to a player. Bonus values are entirely situational and depend on established roleplay. Examples include logistics, terrain, numerical superiority, technological superiority, morale, projectile support, leadership, defense, etc. The effects of a bonus are entirely up to the players. However, the bonuses are situational and may have different weight, importance, or precedence over enemy bonuses in certain scenarios. If a bonus value cannot be agreed on by the two combatants, the values will be determined by a staff member. The maximum general bonus that can be given to players is +3. Any bonus that exceeds 3 in value, without administrator approval, is to remain +3. Any +4 and higher bonus may not be given out without approval from a senior moderator plus. Bonuses from strategic advantages, such as outmaneuvering, neutralizing larger threats, are acceptable when role-played. Usually, this is represented by operations and maneuvers role-played before the rolling of the dice. Victories against all odds and victories from pure luck are not allowed. Risk is a game of role-play, not chance. It is of best interest to minimize the probability of lucky rolls with bonuses. Bonuses for leadership also exist. Depending on the real-life character's achievements, success, genius, and talent with military affairs, they will get a bonus. Bonuses for generals after the year 1910 are not allowed, but exceptions include field battles, guerrilla warfare, naval engagements, etc. Okay, you reached the end. Good job. Now go and preach the guidebook to others.